Hello everyone, welcome to my 13th episode of G.GOES Live. It's Wednesday again and I'm solo tonight to answer your questions about music production, about DJing, music business, recording, etc, etc, etc. And there is a topic that I chose to talk about tonight, which is recording. This topic, I received a lot of requests to discuss recording at home. Not in a professional studio, but at home. So I will be giving you a lot of tips and tricks for people who like to record, whether instruments or vocals or like Foley arts or whatever. And I will be discussing also all the techniques of recording, the gear you want to use, the difference between accessories, etc, etc, etc. And I will also be answering questions on the second half of this session. Questions that I have already received through my my inbox and through my profile. I have questions from Ryan Akiki, from Ralph Asi, from Rami Yamin, and from Walid Hoshar. 4 questions, and of course for people who are joining now, you can also leave your questions, but I cannot really scroll now and look at all the questions, so it's a better idea to send me a private message, and I will log to my messenger and check the messages at the last quarter of this session. So first of all, I would like to start talking about recording. This is a subject that I chose for tonight's session because it's really important. I'm going to discuss all the aspects of recording at home because you asked for this, and I find that this is an important topic, and I will start with it right now. So many people, whether they are singers or whether they play an instrument, guitar or whatever, they like to record at one point what they are performing or singing or even writing. At that point, they have 2 choices. You can go to a professional studio, or you can set up a home studio for recording. But of course, with when you go to a professional studio, you're going somewhere that is well designed for recording, so the quality is better, etc, etc, etc. But of course, you'll pay more money, and you will maybe don't have enough time, or you will be kind of stressed out by the deadline, etc, etc. You have so many disadvantages and advantages. I will go through them. The first thing to consider when you want to record, whether vocal or instrument, etc, is basically the environment, the room you are recording in. Okay, this is very important. Before you choose any microphone, before you do research about anything related to accessories, about which type of microphone you want to get or whatever, my advice to you is to consider your space. Where are you recording? If you're recording in a room that is not treated acoustically, then you have to compensate with quality and with a lot of problems. Okay? So before you really discuss and pick up a microphone or something, check how much reverb or how much interference you have in this room. Okay? For example, if you are in a room that is a kind of empty, you don't have a lot of furniture, you have a lot of surfaces, walls, ceiling, etc. The sound that you are actually recording, your voice or the guitar, the sound coming out from your guitar or instrument, is actually going to your microphone. Yes, that's the direct sound, but many other reflections are also going inside your microphone. So you're not only recording your voice or your instrument, you're also recording a lot of reflections coming from walls, coming from any surface, and that's bad for recording, of course, because you're not recording exactly what you're playing or singing. So the best thing to consider, or the most important thing to consider, is acoustics, room acoustics. And what do I mean by this? I mean, you must really minimize all the reflections coming from walls, side walls, ceilings, etc. I talked about these by installing acoustic panels, absorbers, bass traps, etc. And if you are at home and you cannot spend that much of money, because those panels can really be expensive sometimes, you can find a lot of solutions. Okay? For example, if you have, let's say, a window, a glass window. This window will reflect a lot of your vocal or a lot of the sound that's coming out of your acoustic guitar, etc. It will reflect back for sure through the glass of the window. So what do you do in this case? If you don't have much money to spend on doing those acoustic treatments, you can simply install a very thick acoustic curtain. It's way better than not installing it, and that could be a cheap solution. That's one. Two, for example, you can use for example, mattress, or you can use anything that can absorb the waveforms. For example, if you have a library beside you also, there's one technique you can do. It's a very, very easy thing to do. Just turn the books to front, like don't see the cover of the book from one side. Just see the papers. Okay, that's when the whatever you're hearing, or whatever you're recording, or whatever you're doing, it will be actually absorbed somehow by the papers of the book. That's one simple way to do acoustics. Okay. Another thing you can, for example, use, like I said, you can use furniture, you can use anything to cover walls or cover surfaces. You find a lot of tools in your house. Blanket, for example, a thick blanket. You can cover the side walls, and you can cover areas where sounds can be reflected back to your microphone. Okay, so when we cross this topic, when we finalize everything that have to do with acoustics, you can move on to know more about the actual process of recording, from the time you decide to record to the time you start doing the post editing in your software. So I will start discussing this now. Okay, first of all, you need to decide which microphone to use, because you have two types of microphones. You have the dynamic microphone, and you have the condenser microphone, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about these. Okay, the condenser microphone is a microphone that requires phantom power. Okay, it's a very sensitive microphone, and actually it is the microphone used mainly in studios. Okay, and those condenser microphones, basically they capture details in your voice or of your instrument. And if you really want to capture all those details, you must think of having one of the types of those condenser microphones, because you have many polar patterns in those microphones. A condenser can have, for example, a figure of 8 pattern. What does this mean? It means it can capture wave from both sides. Okay, that's an excellent microphone, for example, for dialogue. If you're recording a dialogue, you can have someone in front of you, and this person can face the microphone from the other side, and your microphone is capturing the wave signal from both sides. That's an excellent microphone for that purpose. But also, it's not only designed for dialogue purposes, because when you use a condenser microphone, a figure of 8 especially, you can use the second side of this microphone to actually capture some reflections. So there is now a conflict between what I said before to cancel reflection and this reflection that I mean now. So let me tell you something about reflection. Reflection is not bad all the time, okay? Because if you record in a room that is completely treated, between bracket, that is completely covered with foam, etc., that's a dead room. You cannot really record in such environment. You should have some reflection, because we live in a reflective environment, okay? So if you record in an environment that is completely far away from the environment that you are recording, you will have something that is not normal, okay? Because we live in a reflective environment, as I said, and we need to have some reflection. That's some kind of reverb mixed with your vocal or with your instrument. So this microphone, the figure of 8, might capture some of the reflections that come from diffusers, for example, or from reflectors that are well designed to give you this kind of reverb that you need to make your sound a bit wet rather than completely dry. Okay, you have many other polar patterns. For example, you have the cardioid, okay, which is taking sound mainly from one direction. Okay, For example, if you face the microphone, that's what it captures the most. And some divisions of the cardioid, you have many divisions also, large diaphragm, large cardioid, etc. You have so many polar patterns, and you have this microphone that I like, which is an omnidirectional microphone, omnidirectional condenser. So what does it mean? Omnidirectional. So it can capture wave from any direction, from anywhere around the microphone. Okay. So this is, for example, great for chorale or whatever. Okay, so you can have 5 people surrounding the microphone and chanting, and it will capture the sound of everybody. It's a very good microphone for such purposes. Okay, and also you can use an omnidirectional microphone for other purposes, not necessarily to have a chorale or whatever. You can also use it for purposes related to reflections, artificial reverb. You can place it, for example, to take an ambience of a room, etc., etc., etc. You also have some other polar patterns. One of them is the supercardioid, and of course you have the most used microphone in studios is the cardioid, the large diaphragm. Okay. Now, when we discuss microphones, I said there are 2 categories of the microphones. We discussed the condenser, which is used mainly in studios, which is very sensitive and it requires phantom phantom power. It requires a preamp because the signal in the condenser is a very low signal. You need to amplify it before conversion. I will talk about this in a minute. Now, the dynamic microphone on the other side, which is a bit less expensive than the condenser, is a microphone basically used mainly on stage in performances, like a singer who's singing on stage to avoid the feedback. Okay, if you use a condenser on stage, you will blow you will blow all the speakers, because a dynamic microphone is opposite. It's not sensitive. It's less sensitive than a condenser microphone. So what does this mean? It means if you actually get a bit far away from the microphone, then the microphone will be less sensitive and it will not capture those waves. Okay, so the dynamic microphone on stage, sometimes you see those singers, they are like eating the microphone. They are very close to it. Yeah, that's a dynamic microphone. When they get far away from it, it doesn't capture any sound. That's why you don't hear the noise of the crowd feeding back inside the microphone and going to your speakers. That's a dynamic microphone. Sometimes a dynamic microphone can actually be used also in studios and can also be used at home, because if you're at home and you have a lot of noise outside, this microphone will not capture the noise outside. Maybe it won't capture the noise of your AC, the fan or whatever. So that's how sensitive it is. It's not sensitive at all. Very little sensitivity on the dynamic microphone, but of course there is a compensation on some frequencies it doesn't capture, etc., etc., etc. It is not designed for professional recording vocal or instruments. Okay, but it can do a good job, a better job than a condenser microphone at home. Okay, because you're not going to spend a lot of money isolating your room or building a box in a box, etc. So you get a dynamic microphone sometimes, and this can save you from capturing a lot of noises. Okay, now the dynamic microphone, it doesn't require phantom power. Okay, so it doesn't require a preamp. You can plug it directly to a mixer, or you can plug it directly to your sound card, but make sure you don't turn on the 48V. That's called the phantom power. And also there is one use for this dynamic microphone in the studio, not for vocal, for example, but for drums, because when you have a drum set of, let's say, maybe 12 pieces, if you put a condenser on each one, the condenser of piece number 1 will capture all the sounds coming from all the pieces, and that's bad. But when you direct a dynamic microphone on each set of the drum, it will capture the most, which the set that is right next to it, which is the same direction on it, but it will capture way less waves from other sets. And sometimes you see in a recording room, for example, you have a drum set with dynamic microphones on each set, and also you have condenser microphone coming from the ceiling to capture all the ambience of the room. And this is an omnidirectional microphone most of the times, okay? Now, some rappers, for example, they like to use a dynamic, some rappers, sorry, they cannot use a dynamic microphone because they move a lot. You know, when you have a microphone and you're moving a lot, when you're moving, you're just giving a lot of dynamic range in the recording. So you have some loudness and some waves that are not loud, etc. So you have a lot of dynamics. This microphone, which is the dynamic microphone, is capturing more of when you are close to it, and it's capturing less of when you are not close to it. So you will have a lot of difference between high peaks and low peaks. Okay, so that's why in the studio you need a condenser microphone to capture all the detail, even if you're moving a bit far away from the microphone, etc., etc., etc. Now let's say you chose to use a condenser microphone. Okay. Now, of course, after you are so physically comfortable and you're not sick or whatever, you place your microphone, the condenser microphone. How should it be placed? What accessories can you use with it? And all those details. Now, let's say you chose a condenser microphone out of the microphones that you have in the market. And by the way, each condenser microphone has its own character. So for people who have high pitch, for example, they use a certain model. For people who have, for example, for female, it's something. Each microphone has its own response and character in recording. Okay. Now you chose a microphone and you mount it on a microphone stand. Now you have to be careful here because the stand is also something you should really consider. A stand that has no, it's in direct contact with the wall, might capture a lot of vibrations. Okay, and that's really bad sometimes because when you're moving, you're putting your weight, you're moving, you're stepping next to the on the floor. I mean, and this is a vibration happening, and this vibration is captured by the stand, and the stand, of course, the microphone is mounted on the stand, and the microphone will capture those vibrations. Since the condenser microphone is so sensitive, it will capture all those vibrations, and that's really bad for recording. So what should you do in this case? You should install a shock mount. Okay, that's an accessory. It's a piece of gear. You can mount the microphone onto it, and the microphone will be mounted, of course, onto the stand. Okay, so the vibrations that the stand is taking from the wall, because of you, because of whatever bass frequencies you're stepping, etc., and it will take those vibrations, and it has a specific what do you call it, rubber kind of design, and it will capture those vibrations, and it will not let those frequencies touch the microphone. So your microphone will somehow be floating in air. Okay, so there is no contact between your microphone and any vibration. Now, when let's say you are doing this, you use a software, of course, which is let's say Ableton Live, and you need a medium. You need something to take this signal, which is analog, in the microphone and translate it into a digital. Now, I'm not going to discuss this translation because I already discussed this in detail in my 3rd episode of G.GOES Live. You can go back and watch it on YouTube or on my Facebook playlist. Okay, it's very important, by the way. You have to go back and watch it one day you're free. It's really important. I talked about sample rate, I talked about buffer size, I talked about the bit depth, etc., etc., how this conversion from analog to digital happened. Okay, now let's say you are set on a sample rate of 96K, let's say, and you're recording at 24-bit. Now I will discuss this as well, not 16, not 32, that if your sound card can handle, of course. And now you need to set the input level of your microphone. That's very important. Really, it's really important, because once you record a signal that is distorted, you can never fix it in post. Okay, you have to record a signal that has no distortion, that is with enough headroom. Okay, you must not record something on a level that is, in my opinion, higher than -12 dB. Okay, you can record at -20, -20, etc., but don't cross -12 dB. Just set your input gain to around -12. So you have to take many takes, and you test. You just test yourself and sing the whole song, or play the whole piece of music, and just go back to your software and check the wave. Okay, if at one point it hits the 0 dB fs, my advice is to just adjust your input gain to match -12. You have the maximum volume you reach is -12. Okay, this way you can edit and you can master or mix in a more professional way in post production, post recording. Okay, so now what you're doing, you're actually you're recording your voice or your instrument, and this signal reached your sound card. I also discussed sound card a lot, and you set the input level to have a registration on your channel meter, rounded box, of course, in Ableton, at -12 dB, let's say, as an average. And now you're ready to record. Okay, so you just create a new scene or a new channel or whatever, and you just press on record, you start recording. Now my advice to you as well is not to delete anything, because sometimes it only takes one letter or one word or one sentence to take from another recording and just edit things to avoid recording the whole thing again. Some people try to record one sentence each time. Some people, they just do one take and finish the song. Some people, it's always different from person to person. I had people in my studio from before, they used to record one sentence per day. Imagine. Those people used to be very anxious, and they used to do a lot of mistakes, and please repeat, and I kept hearing this sentence for ages in my mind. That's why I quit being a recording artist. So my advice to you is to prepare well before you go to a studio or before you start recording, because once there, you need to spend less time, because at the end of the day, you're making yourself tired, and you're maybe losing interest at one point if you record many times, etc., etc., etc. So be prepared, be comfortable physically, psychologically, etc., and then you just do one take for each bar maybe, or one take for each phrase, or maybe one take for the whole song. Now after you record whatever you want to record, you have to do something called a post editing or post recording. Okay, and that's very important. I'm not going to discuss the whole thing. Of course, I'm going to discuss some few tips and tricks, and what do you do with this signal that you have recorded. Now, of course, when you record something, when you look at the piece of wave that you recorded, you will notice that you have a lot of differences, okay, between peaks, between levels, and that's what we call dynamic range. The dynamic range sometimes might be too little, or might be too much of dynamic range. And by the way, sometimes, for example, if you're recording piano, okay, sometimes it's on purpose to have a dynamic range. It's not always if you see a peak with a low peak and you have a lot of dynamic range, okay, which this is wrong. No, sometimes you do it on purpose. That's how velocity works. That's what when you're hitting notes softly, and when you hitting note in a harder way, that's when you trigger different emotions. Okay, but let's talk about maybe you're rapping, for example, or you're playing something that you don't want to have big dynamic range on purpose. Okay, that was a mistake in recording. Maybe you moved too much, maybe you said some letters, maybe your pop filter was, maybe you were too close to the microphone, your pop filter couldn't really tame those P and B, etc., 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 and now you have a lot of peaks that are there destroying your headroom, not leaving you with any space to do mastering or to do at least volume gain, to increase the gain. Okay, so what you do now is, first of all, you must consider, I'm going to discuss maybe, let's say, three factors, three procedures. Okay, the first one, not by order of course, the first one that comes to mind now is compression. Compression, what is compression? Compression, basically, it takes all the peaks above a certain level that you will decide, of course, and it will push them down in volume. It will compress them down in volume based on a rate, of course, and based on where is this line, where is this threshold that you have set. Okay, the compressor is not something really hard to understand. I will maybe do a G.GOES live session on compression, but it's really something not so hard to. Maybe it took me 5 years to understand compression, because I wasn't really understanding what is a compressor and what is this attack or release or threshold, or it used to be some taboo for me. But I understood compression after I started recording the signal before and after, and I do comparison. I look at the signal and I say, what happened when I did a compression at, for example, a ratio of 4:1? I look to the wave, I do comparison. Now I say, what if I increase the attack? Do it. If you are already confused about compression, this is the only way you will actually understand what it does. Okay, and when you understand it, you can use it not only for killing a dynamic range or minimizing it, or for mixing purposes. You might also be using it for sound design. Sometimes you just crush a kick, you make it distorted. Sometimes you just play with the dynamics inside one sample. Sometimes you just, for example, give an attack on the very first transient and leave the rest compressed, etc. So you use it sometimes for sound design. You do distortion on purpose for sound design, and so many other things. You can play with dynamics inside one sample or one loop or one wave file. Okay, so compression, as in a summary of it, is to control your dynamic range, to make it basically less, to have less difference between high peaks and low peaks. And the way you draw this threshold, and this threshold, it means, okay, what do you want to do with the sounds that are crossing this threshold, that are above this threshold? And basically, when you draw the threshold, there is no preset to do that. You must see your wave. You must see how you record it. Sometimes, for example, you have an average recording at -12, that's the average, but you said a P or a B, or you were too close, and you have something that peaked at -5. Maybe that's the only thing that peaked at -5, so that's the problem. So you set your threshold maybe at -12, let's say, and you tell your compressor anything above this line, which is this P or B, or maybe another thing you did, just when you find them, when you find something that is above this average that I want, just push it down in volume in a certain ratio. For example, 2:1. 2:1 is like every 2 decibels above this threshold, let them become 1 decibel. So you're cutting them in half. You can do 4:1, but when you reach 10:1, it becomes a limiter. Okay, this is something else you can use: a limiter, a compressor. You have a lot of things to do with dynamic processing. We call this dynamic processing. Now, of course, EQing is one major part of dealing with your recordings. You can, for example, cut out some frequencies that you don't want, or you can boost some frequencies that you find missing from your vocal, or you can just give some color to your voice, etc. That's EQing. There is an art of EQing. Of course, also EQing is used for many purposes. One of the purposes is to deal with unwanted frequencies, to filter them, clear them, make the sound better, make the sound more clear, as I said, etc. And of course, EQing can also be used for sound design. You can just change, and you can give a boost for a sound, and it will you can use it for sound design. Okay, so sometimes also you can use filters. You can use many types of EQs. I'm not going to discuss all of these things, but I discussed the compressor, the limiter in brief. There is a gator, for example. There is a gate effect unit, or a device, or an analog gear. Gator, for example, it works similarly to similarly to the compression, but the gator, it works, for example, best use for it is to close the gate for sounds below a certain point. For example, if you are recording something, there is a gap between the words or between the sentences, and this gap, you have some noise from the AC or noise from whatever, and you want to cut them out completely out of your mix. So instead of going and searching for those and just doing sample edit, like selecting this area and pressing delete, etc., or drawing a lot of automation of volume, no, you just have a gator and you tell the gator, okay, look, any sound that is below certain point, which is too low in volume, just cut it out, or give it a floor of -40, for example, like tame it, compress it, or just remove it completely from my mix. Just close the door, don't let it pass. Okay, that's a gator. And a gator also could be used in sidechain for vocal, for people who do trance vocals. They can chop the vocal, and sometimes they can use an arpeggiator for that, or a gator in sidechain. You have so many techniques available for dealing with whatever you have recorded. Okay. Now, of course, you have band compression. You can compress not the volume above a certain threshold. You can compress certain frequencies. That's called multi-band compressor. For example, you say, okay, when the bass reaches this level, anything above this level, push it down, etc. So you're dealing with the volume of a band of frequency, whether it's a low or mid or high. So many things. Sometimes you add an effect processor to your vocal, like a reverb, to give it some kind of wetness or some kind of a spacey sound. Now with reverb you should be really careful. Okay, sometimes you use a reverb with no diffusion at all. You only use the some aspect of the reverb which gives you very little reverb set in the background. Okay, delays, sometimes use echoes, delays. You can use, for example, so many, but the most important thing again is to filter, okay, to clean, to make the sound that you have recorded a better sound before you get into processing anything. Okay, before you get into reverb or delay or chorus or whatever, before you get into these things, try to spend some time on post-editing, post-production, post-recording, filtering, cutting out unwanted frequencies, gating, multi-band compression, etc., etc., etc. Those are the things that come to mind. Okay. Now, of course, you have so many things related to recording as well that you need to know about. Like, for example, you can't use a very long cable for it, or you can't let this cable pass through metal, because those are from my own experience as well. The cable might capture a lot of noise, whether this noise comes from electricity or from radio frequency, etc., etc. You have so many things related to recording. By my advice to you, if you are at home, you want to record, you don't have a lot of money to spend on acoustic treatment, just use any tool. Use any curtain. Use a mobile curtain. Just clip it on anything, okay, and just cover your sides, that cover your microphone somehow. Of course, you cannot record inside a closet. So last time a guy told me I can record inside the closet. That's a dead area. That's a dead room. You must have some space for that. Okay. Now, I'm done with recording. Basically, I don't know if I missed something. Let me check. Sound card. I talked about the input level. I talked about monitoring. You can monitor yourself, of course. If you want to record, you can listen to what you're recording. And there is something really important that I missed now, is the type of headphones you're using, okay? Because that's part of the gear that you use in recording. The headphones must be a closed back headphone, not an open back headphone. So it should be a closed back headphone so that it doesn't kind of leak sounds, okay? And my advice to you, that's the last thing I wanted to say about recording. My advice to you, don't listen to the normal metronome you have in your software. Don't. I think, in my opinion, the worst thing ever created for music production and recording is this metronome. Ta, 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 something like this. It's so bright, so loud, and it is on a high frequency. And I don't get it. Why did they design the metronome to be standard like this, to be on high frequency, it will leak from the headphones. My advice to you, because psychoacoustically speaking, your ear is very, very sensitive to mid and high frequencies, especially in the area of the 5K, etc. And when you are hearing a metronome, your microphone will capture this. Sometimes even if you're using a closed back headphones, your microphone will capture the metronome. And it's so annoying. When I deal with acapellas, for example, I always hear metronome clicks in the background. It's so easy. Just have any beat, okay, which is a bass kick drum. A low frequency sound will not be captured by the microphone the same way the metronome will be captured by the microphone. Just create your own metronome. Create a channel with a loop of kicks. If you're recording on house music, for example, just do an 4/4, a bass kick drum, and I am so sure that it will also be less annoying to you when you hear kick, or just hear something with less high frequencies. So don't use high frequencies as reference on your headphones. They will leak into this microphone, okay? I don't understand it. High frequency, pitched up metronome. It's so stupid, okay? Just have a kick drum, bass kick drum. You will focus. It will act as an internal clock, and you will sync up to it perfectly. There is no mistake in using it, okay? So that's it. That's my advice to you about recording. Now, as I promised, the second half of the session, which will start now, I'm going to answer questions that I received on my Facebook profile. And the first question is from the first question is from Ryan Akiki. I like Ryan because he's always with me on this show. He's always asking questions. And this question, he said, do distribution companies pay radio stations to play a certain track, or is it vice versa? Ryan, you hit me on my nerves. I love to talk about mainly two things in my life, about music business and about mixing, not in DJing, as a mix down. And I have another question from Ralph Asi. Hello Mo, after production phase, why producers recommend to render all channels to audio before mixing? What is the advantage? And why mixing on the same project where you produced is a bad step to do? This is an excellent question as well, Ralph. My third question is Rami Yamin. How and where can I register my tracks? And do you accept tracks in your label from all those genres? And last question is from Walid. And Walid, I think, is waiting now. Is it called a remix when we use an a cappella and compose over it a song? And what are the basics of a remix? Can we use the presets of the original composer or the instrument devices? Regards. Now, let me start with Rami. Rami Yamin, how and where can I register my tracks? First of all, if you are a producer, you can sign your track on a label, okay? Now, I'm going to also talk about this, answering the question of Ryan in a minute, but you need a label that will take the copyright of your song, and it will distribute it through distribution companies, of course, to online stores, or maybe to physical CD or vinyl, etc. Now, you as an artist, you don't have any connection with Beatport or iTunes or online stores. Now, you can, and I will explain later on, but in order for you as an artist to have your track distributed in the market, you need to sign it with a record label, okay? So this record label will own the copyright of your track, and it will give you a lot of services. The track becomes theirs, okay? So they will hook up remixes, they will design the art cover, they will master it, they will send it to big names, they will support it, they will promote it, etc., etc., etc. And of course, they will, along with the distribution company, they let your track be on sale on all major online stores, and maybe on CD or whatever. Now, your second question was, do you accept tracks in your label from all house genre? Of course I do, but I'm focused on progressive house and / techno, okay? That's mainly what I do on the label. And you have so many genres and styles. all of them are nice, but I'm specified in a certain sound. Now, I will also answer Walid now. I'm leaving Ryan till the end. Walid, he's asking me about a remix. If he's using an a cappella, is it called a remix? Well, Walid, let me tell you one thing, and I always discuss this. A remix, if you just chop the word re and mix, what does it mean? You're remixing something, okay? So, for example, if you have a puzzle, okay, you can remix it, reshuffle it in a different way. A remix, as I see it, okay, an official remix is when the label approaches you and gives you the layers of the original track and they ask you to remix it. So what does it mean? It means you can use those layers, but in a different mix, in a different way, in a different sequence, in a different timeline, different production, okay? So for example, if you have a track with a cappella and bass line and synth line and drums, etc., they give you all those elements, and I will explain what they give actually. You are free to use only one out of the so many layers that they give you. Like for example, you might choose the a cappella only, or you might choose the bass line only and do a remix without an a cappella. Now, of course, the label might tell you, look, you have to do a remix, but we want the a cappella to be there. Sometimes you do a rework, not a remix. You do a completely rework, okay? So, remix, call it whatever you want to call it. I'm a fucking alcoholic, no, not this. So a remix is when you actually change an aspect in the track, whether you are mashing up a vocal or adding a new bass line or just. But as I told you, my way of seeing the word as a dictionary, a remix is an official remix when the label approaches you, when they give you the layers of the track. That's when you are called a remixer on the label. When you download a track from the internet or when you buy it from Beatport, and this track is not a vocal track, and you have an a cappella, a studio a cappella that you bought it from another place, you can actually mix them together and make them one track. That's a mash-up, okay? It's not a remix, it's a mash-up. But when you write remix next to it, that's when people in the business will look at you in a way, whether you are a professional or not, okay? Because if you want to say this is a remix, just add next to it an official remix. That will make you a wiser person, and they take you more seriously, okay? And of course, you cannot sell an unofficial remix. You cannot sign an unofficial remix to a label. Like, for example, you like a track from Michael Jackson and you take it, you chop it into pieces, you add to it another a cappella, or you change some aspects of the bass line, or you take some melody, you change the sequence of the notes, and you just send it back to the label and tell them, I want to release this. No, you cannot do that. And of an official remix, I call it an edit, or a mashup, or a bootleg, or whatever, but it's not a remix. Now, you also asked me, we can use an a cappella and compose over it a song. Yes, of course you can take an a cappella and produce something completely new. Like you produced everything from your own creative process. You chose every single element from your own project, and what you did, you added an a cappella. That's your track, of course, but sign it. You cannot sign this track because you don't own the copyright of the a cappella, okay? When you own the copyright of the a cappella, you might discuss this with the label itself, because some a cappellas are stolen, distributed online for free. Some a cappellas are there for you to use, they sell it. And some a cappellas are open, they have a license, you can use them, and you can also re-release them, you can sign them on another label, etc. It depends on which a cappella you're talking about. If it's an a cappella that has no copyright, or a royalty-free right to it, you can actually use it and sign it again on a different label. What are the basics of a remix? The basics of the remix is, as I told you, a remix, an official remix, is when you take layers from, of course, when the label gives you the layers of a track, and you just use some or all or none of the major elements of the track, and you create everything else from scratch. For example, I had one remixer on my label, Kevin Di Serna, and I sent him as a label, of course, I sent him an EP stem file for him to remix this track, and he used only one element that I am till now looking for it in the track. He used one element from maybe, I don't know, one chop of a bass, and he did a complete rework. Okay, so if you hear the original and you hear the remix, they have nothing to do in common, and that's a complete rework. And this track got into the top 50 in Beatport, then got into the top 20, then it got into the charts of Cataneo, etc., etc., etc. Again, if you want to do a remix, you have to think of using some of the layers given to you by the label, and you're free to use any. Of course, you need to create something from scratch. You never use drums, for example. Like, for example, if I'm a label, I want to send a remix, I don't send him the kick drum or the snare drum. I don't send those layers, because he has to reform this pattern of drums, but he can use a main element from the remix pack. What is a main element? It could be a bass line, it could be a synth line, it could be a chord progression, it could be vocal, but not drums, not kicks, not sound effects, not those minor things. Okay. Now, can we use the presets of the original composer or the instrument devices? If they share the preset of a certain plugin, yes, you can still use it. Why not? And if some labels, they just ask you to do that. There's one time I was approached by a label for a remix, and they were like, please do anything you want, but we want you to use this specific sound. It was in audio, by the way, not a preset of a plugin, but they sent me the bass line in MIDI and in audio. That's how they send remix pack. And I usually don't work with the audio files. I take the MIDI files, because I have to do the same melody but different sound, of course, or a chop of the melody, different sound. And this guy, the label owner, he was like, please use this sound. I don't want you to use any other preset, any other sound. You can add to it, of course. You can do multi-track, multi-channel. You can still do that, but I still want to hear this specific sound, because it is a main element in his track. So Walid, I think I answered you. I'm back to Ralph Asi. Hello Mo, after production phase, why producers recommend to render all channels to audio before mixing? This is a very good question, Ralph, and I'm very glad you asked it. As I said, I love to talk about mixing and about music business, and I left the question of Ryan till the end, because there is much more to talk about. Now, Ralph, let me tell you something, and this is also very important for, take it as a tip. Anyone who's watching now can also take this as a tip. 1 second. Look, when you are producing a track, it depends what computer you're using, okay? If you're using, for example, a super powerful computer with multi-core processing, etc., 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 now this is when you can actually boost your sample rate, or you can crank down your buffer size to have a faster process with a lower latency and with a faster process of audio and conversion, etc. Now, when you reach a phase in your production, let's say you started with drums, you started with kicks, snares, etc. You have a drum rack, then you have you started adding some loops, audio, and now you're fine. You're just fine. Your project can handle still. Okay, your CPU meter is at maybe 20%, 30%, etc. Now, when you reach a level, when you reach a certain number of channels, you start adding plugins. Okay, you start adding effect processors like reverb, delay, plugins like Silent, Arturia, etc. You start adding those very heavy processes, and you move on your project with all the automations, and maybe you have a synthesizer with 16 voice, and you're playing a note with unison, etc., etc. You have so much processing power happening in your CPU. Now, if your computer can handle, that's fine. Okay. You reach a point in your production process when you start having audio dropouts, and you cannot really work under these circumstances. Audio dropouts are very, 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 they block the way, and you cannot work under these conditions, okay? So what you do at this point, you can't add any more layers, you can't add any more sound, you cannot process anything else. What if you want to add more? Let's say you have 40, sometimes from one channel you start getting audio dropouts, okay? Because Ableton or whatever software you're using is reading every single channel with all the chaining of devices and all the chaining of effects, and with the synthesizer, I mean the VSTI, it's so much going on, okay? Now, imagine you have a synthesizer and you're playing a chord, 3 notes, and the sound itself is a 8-voice sound, let's say. So you're playing a chord of maybe, let's say, 8 notes, okay? And you have some options to detune the sound, and you have to duplicate the sound from inside the synthesizer to make it super wide or whatever. And your computer now is processing a heavy sound, okay? What you should do at that stage, and that's the key of it all, what you should do now is render this channel to audio. Don't let it sit there as a MIDI channel with a VSTI next to it, a chain of effects. You can still have everything on this channel. Let me talk about Ableton, okay? Ableton, they have this very good, very useful technique called freeze. You can right click and freeze your channel. When you freeze this track or channel, everything will be rendered to audio, and this file, the new wave file, will be in your current project file, okay? You are going to hear exactly what is there as in VSTI and automations and reverbs and etc., all the chaining of effects. You are going to hear the audio version of it, and your channel will be frozen, so you cannot touch anything anymore, okay? Of course, until you unfreeze it to do some edits. But when you are at that stage, freeze your track, because when you are on 50%, let's say, CPU meter, you do the freeze, you go back to 1%. Why? Because Ableton is now looking at your channel as if it's a wave loop coming from your sample library. It doesn't take anything. The wave files don't take much of process power, okay? So you are still hearing everything, but as in audio. No processing happening in real time, nothing. And this file or this channel that is in freeze mode, you cannot touch it anymore. You cannot touch the notes even in the MIDI notes, in the piano roll. You cannot control automations. You cannot do anything because it is frozen. Now, when you reach a point you want to edit something, of course you can unfreeze the channel, make some edits in automation or whatever, and freeze it again, okay? But of course, at the end of the day, you need to delete all those files that you are not using, because you did the freeze one time and then you did the unfreeze and you did the freeze again. So all the frozen files are not really useful anymore. So you need to go into your file management and delete all the unused files, which makes your project file way smaller in size, okay? So your question was, Ralph, after production phase, why producers recommend to render all channels to audio before mixing? Okay, so I gave you a tip on how to reduce your CPU consumption, okay, by freezing your track. Now, there's another option after you do the freeze. There's another option called flatten. It's not really something that I do to flatten, because when you flatten, you're actually deleting everything from this channel, whether it's a VSTI or chaining of it, delete everything, and you only see a wave file now on your timeline, okay? So you converted completely a MIDI track with all the instruments on it. It's like you took a recorder, you recorded the signal, and that's it. You're now using the recorded signal. I don't do it, because at that time you lose your VSTI. You don't have access to it anymore. If you want to change some aspect of it, you don't have access. This is when artists, also record labels, like I always ask for a remix pack. I always ask for stems, like multi-channel recording, audio and MIDI as well. But I don't ask for VSTI. I don't ask for which device did you use, which preset did you use. No, I just ask for the wave format of this melody or bass or etc., and the MIDI notes only, without the actual sound that they used in the VSTI. Now, when you finish with the freeze procedure to have less power on the CPU, less abuse on your CPU, some artists, yes, they render to audio and they send it to a mixing engineer. I'll tell you why. When you go to a mixing engineer, some engineers, they don't access your project file as in project file. What does it mean? They don't access your notes. They don't access your VSTI. They don't access your reverb or delay or chaining of effects. They don't have to do with it. The mixing engineer might tell you, listen, give me the stems, give me only the wave files. And you have to render all the wave files in the same length. You have to be very careful here, okay? And the mixing engineer takes those files, put them on top of each other, and he has your project now, but in audio. So he doesn't know how you played the melody, he doesn't know how you designed the sound, he doesn't know how you did this and that. Some artists might not want to share this, and they want to only give the mixing engineer stems, like audio files. But if you are a good mixing artist, not engineer, the artist side, the artistic side, if you did well with your mixing, sometimes the mixing engineer can ask only for stems. In my case, okay, in my case, I can't be fully responsible mixing a track that is only in audio. I cannot mix stems, because why? Sometimes, let's say you have a mini V from Arturia and you're producing a bass line. You added a lot of automation, let's say on the cutoff, okay? And you as an artist, you don't know a technique, for example, to split frequencies, because as a rule, as in my opinion as well, you should not add any reverb or delay or make anything wide below 200 hertz, let's say, for example. And what you did, you added a chorus or a reverb or a delay or whatever, or you increased something in the mini V on the bass. What you heard is the effect that happened on the mid and high tones of the bass. That's correct. But you also affected the low elements, okay? Now, if you did not do the splitting of frequencies, like the mini V will be split into frequencies below 200 hertz and frequencies above 200 hertz, and you apply all your effects and all your stereo imaging on this chain, which is not the bass, the sub bass, etc., which is below 250 or 300, etc. Me as an artist or as a mixing engineer or whatever, I can't go back and fix that mistake if I'm dealing with a stem file, because that's recorded, that's it. You cannot change much of it, okay? And sometimes you need to go back to your synthesizer, you need to go back to your plugin, you need to go back to the chaining of effect and fix some things. So some artists, some engineers, and I always recommend artists, producers to learn mixing, because you are the only one who knows how to mix your track. If you give your track to a mixing artist, my advice to you, do something called stem mastering, okay? Each sound by itself, like design something, the kick, for example, let someone clean it for you. The snare, let someone clean it for you and tune it for you, etc. But again, I tell you, this is a very complicated process. It doesn't happen in this way. My advice for producers to learn mixing, at least the basics, the foundation, the essentials of mixing. Why? Because when you are in the process of production, you have to mix your own track. You have to know how to listen, how to filter, how to cut out unwanted frequencies, how to do leveling, how to do the gain staging inside the box, how to do, but never touch the master channel, of course. That's mastering, okay? And I discussed this a lot, by the way, in the past. In my opinion, mixing is way much more important than mastering, way much time consuming than mastering, way much more creative than mastering, etc. And in my tracks, in my album, I have a lot of tracks that are well mixed, not mastered, and they sound amazing, they sound great. People ask me, who mastered your track? It wasn't mastered, I mixed it properly, okay? So I gave you the advantage and disadvantage of freezing a track, converting it to audio. When you do freeze in Ableton, my advice to you not to flatten, keep the original chaining of your VSTI so that you can edit them. And you asked also, what is and why mixing on the same project where you produced is a bad step to do? I told you, because at one point you don't have enough processing power to listen to everything at once. I contradict you in this. Mixing on the same project where you produced is not a bad step to do if you do the freeze and if you have much headroom in the CPU, I mean, as a percentage, it's not a really bad idea. I do not agree, Ralph. But sometimes you after you do the filtering and the cleaning of everything, and you do not want to change any aspect in your synthesizers, like in VSTI or the chaining of effects, it is, yes, a better idea to convert everything to audio and go to a new project and to mix it, because at that point your CPU can handle more processing of a lot of processing, like dynamic processing, sorry, or applying some kind of staging in volume, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, let's move to the last question, which is Ryan Akika. I kept this for till the end, Ryan, because I love to talk about this. Ryan asked me, do distribution companies pay radio stations to play a certain track, or is it vice versa? Now, before I answered you, Ryan, I studied music business and artist management. I studied about, and I also have my label, and I also do this business. I've been doing it since 2010, and I know a lot of stuff, secrets, etc. But let me tell you something. What I do in my label and what I studied might be different than each other, okay? When you produce music, electronic dance music, when you don't have vocals or when you don't hit the charts, etc., that's something. And when you do commercial stuff and when you go to radio, that's something else. It's a different law, it's a different contract, it's a different term, etc., etc., etc. Now, you asked about radio station. Do distribution companies pay radio stations to play a certain track, or is it vice versa? Before I answer you this, Ryan, I must say thank you, a big thank you, to my very close friend, DJ Mass. He's the production manager and the music manager at Virgin Radio in Lebanon. I've known this guy since he was a kid, maybe more than 15 years or 16 years. He's a genius, and I love this guy. Now he's managing all these things at the Virgin Radio. And by the way, I called him today to get some information from him, and he was very helpful. He told me some stuff I also didn't know about how radio stations in Lebanon function with this copyright and stuff like that. So let me tell you one thing, Ryan, before we get into what DJ Mass told me. So that was your question. If you are a songwriter, you own the copyright of your song, okay? You own the copyright. Now, if, for example, your track is played on the radio or your track is streamed online, etc., 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 you're missing out on collecting something called performance rights, okay? Those performance rights are the rights, the money, the royalties that you might collect from radio stations or from YouTube or any streaming platform, etc., etc., etc. So let's first of all discuss the aspects of this business before I tell you exactly the answer that you want. A performance royalty is something that is paid for the songwriter when this song is streamed online or played live or played by DJs or played on the radio, etc., etc., etc. Now, for someone to collect those royalties, the performance royalties, this person must be registered at a PRO, which is the Performing Rights Organization. Okay, this is a PRO that collects money from radio stations, TV, etc., 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 and distribute the performance royalties to the songwriters or to the publishers, etc., etc., etc. Now, I will discuss this in a minute, but let me tell you one thing about what you asked. The answer is no. Distribution companies do not pay the radio station to play a track. And the radio station doesn't pay, what did you ask me? Vice versa, doesn't pay the distribution companies anything to play a certain track. Not even for an artist, okay? Look how things happen in the radio. Now, what DJ Mass told me today, I asked him a very straightforward question. I was like, if you are playing a song for a DJ, a Lebanese DJ, for example, on the radio, do you charge him for something, or is just is there any fees he must pay, or what do you do? He said, no, of course not. We don't take money from anybody. We support the local talent if the track, of course, has the same standards of whatever is being played on the radio. Now, by the way, Ryan, let me tell you something. Distribution companies, they have nothing to do with radios anyway. It's not the distribution company. You don't have a distribution company giving the radio anything to broadcast. Okay, a distribution company deals with sales. Like, for example, I am a label. I can't reach Beatport unless I go to a distribution company first. Okay, so without a distribution company, I don't have access to iTunes or Beatport or whatever. Me as a label, I have artists signed with me, songwriters, etc. So the distribution company has to do with sales, whether CDs or online downloads, etc., etc. So that's the job of the distribution company. But if you hear a song on the radio, let's say, for example, you're hearing something that is a Justin Bieber hit or whatever, okay? How does it happen? How does the artist or the songwriter or the publisher, how do these people get paid, etc., 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 and what is this whole thing about copyright and radio broadcasting, etc., etc.? Now, as I told you, as a songwriter, let's say you are a vocalist and you went to you created a song, you own the copyright of the song, and we're not talking about selling the song, okay? This is something else. This is called a mechanical royalty. Mechanical royalty, look, you have two types of royalties. Royalties means whatever money you're collecting, okay? The royalty, the mechanical rights or royalties are those money, this money paid because of sale. When you sell a track, when you sell an album, when you sell a CD, etc. This is the money generated here is called a mechanical royalty, okay? And this has a type of right called a mechanical right, okay, not a performance right. Those are two different royalties and two different rights, two different copyrights. So when you talk about a performance royalty, this royalty has to do with performance, whether it's being played on radio or TV, commercial, ad, streamed online, YouTube, etc. This is called a performance royalty. Now, you as a songwriter, if you want to benefit from the performance royalties that are generated by the PROs, okay, those companies I mentioned before, and by the way, we have in Lebanon one of the biggest PROs, the SASAM, Société des auteurs et compositeurs, éditeurs de musique, هيك. And you have, for example, in America, you have the ASCAP, which is the American Association, the American Society, I forgot what it's called, I have it here, the American Society of Composers, Authors and Publishers, BMI, which is the Broadcast Music Inc., etc. Those are called PROs, okay, the performing rights organizations. So what they do, they go and collect money from radio stations, TVs, etc., etc., and they pay royalties to the songwriters or to the publishers. Now, what's the difference? If you are a songwriter, you are a do-it-yourself, you are a solo guy, you're not signed, you're not, etc., and you produced a track, let's say, or you recorded a track, and you're not interested in selling it, that's another subject, and you want to play it on the radio, okay? Now, your question, how to reach the radio, that's, as I told you, the radio might support you if the track is good enough to be played on the radio, but there is no procedure, you going there and knocking the door, take this money, play my track. There is nothing related to this, at least here, okay? What happens, I'm talking about something else now, which is the radio station pays something called a blanket license, okay? A blanket license is a license they pay for the PROs for them to allow those radio stations to broadcast any song from their catalog. So let me go back a little bit so that you don't get confused. You're a songwriter, you have a track. Let's say you're a famous songwriter, okay? And you don't have really the time and the accounting to go and look for accounting and collect royalties. You don't have this connection anyway. So radio stations might be playing your track without you earning anything, or your track might be all over YouTube and you're not earning anything. So how do you earn money out of the performance royalties? You must register as a songwriter with a PRO, like with SASAM or ASCAP or BMI or etc. So those companies, they have a huge catalog of songs. If you sign or if you register yourself as a songwriter, as an independent songwriter, you don't belong yet to a publishing company. I will discuss this now. If you sign yourself, or if you create an account, if you are a member with ASCAP, for example, you are only with ASCAP. You can only register with one PRO as a songwriter. You cannot register with more than one PRO. So what if, in our case in Lebanon, we have, as in the government, we have a deal with SASAM, okay, which is one of the PROs as well in the world. If you are a songwriter signed with ASCAP, which is mainly in USA or whatever, you might not get any royalties from your track being played in Lebanon or in many other countries. That's why you need to have a publisher, okay? A publishing company has the right to register with many PRO, not only with one. So that's the difference between you registering with a direct contract with a PRO, or going to a publishing company, having a deal with the publishing company, maybe a 50-50 royalty, and this publishing company, because it has the right to register with many PROs, your music will be added to the catalog of ASCAP, to BMI, to SASAM, to etc., 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 all the PROs. So in any country in the world, if your track is played on a radio station, whether this country is signed or registered with SASAM or ASCAP or whatever, your song is already in this catalog. Those companies, they have a common catalog most of the time, because mainly the artists or the songwriters, they don't really deal with them directly. They deal with the publishing company. The publishing company will register with many PRO, and your track will be, those PROs will collect money from all the radio stations, all the platforms, YouTube, etc., all the countries in the world, and you might earn some good money at the end of the month or at the end of the year, okay? Now, one thing you should also understand about this procedure is that the actual PRO, which is the Performance Rights Organization, when you are registered with this organization, they manage all your database, everything about you. I mean, in music files, in tracks. So if you are registered with let's say SASAM, you're only with SASAM. Your track is with your catalog, everything about you, all your music is with this PRO, okay? That's why my advice, if you really want to gain money from your broadcast, your performance rights, your performance royalties, have a deal with a publishing company, okay? This is really, really important. Now, there is a difference, of course, between a publishing company and a record label, etc. As I told you, the publishing company, they own the composition of the song, okay? They don't own the actual recordings of the song. Like, for example, you're a singer, and let's say you are writing a song, and you have a drummer with you. You took this drummer to a studio, okay? Who paid for it? The label. And this piece of music is owned by the label. By the way, whoever pays for recording is a big word, owns the copyright of this recorded material, okay? And basically, who pays for the artist to go into a studio? A record label, okay? So the record label mainly deals with the actual recordings of the song, layers of the song, whatever was recorded in the studio, the actual piece of music, okay, whether it's a vocal or as a drum or etc. Now the composition of the song itself as an entity, this is something else, okay. That's when we talk about publishing. So the record label might be of a good use to prepare a certain release, make an album cover, promote it in the market, distribute it in the market through a distribution company, selling, collecting, etc. That's a job of the record label. But as a publishing company, they have nothing to do with mechanical rights, okay? They don't collect anything from sales, whether those sales are from downloads or from CDs, albums, etc. They only have to do with performance royalties. They collect money from broadcasting, whether it's a radio station, etc., 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 etc. Now I asked my friend DJ Mas, I was like, how do you know, how do you play, how do you chart those music? Like, for example, he said you must be there all the time, do your research, you have to check what's new, always you have to do a lot of effort to be up to date and to be going in parallel with the market worldwide and also locally, okay? So that's about it. DJ Mas, I thank you so much for a lot of information you gave today. And to finish this, I think I answered all the questions. I answered all the questions from Ryan to Ralph to Rami to Walid. And I think it's time for me to say goodbye to you. I'll see you next Wednesday. Next Wednesday I have a guest. The Wednesday after I will start a new series. It's about music theory for computer musician. It's a very important series. It will be a 4 weeks. Now, of course, 4 bi-weekly, we say maybe 2 months. And I will be discussing tips and tricks. What can you do if you're not a musician? How can you produce complex melodies? What tools can you use? What technology is out there, from plugins to hardware to etc. And I will have a guest on the 23rd, which I will leave as a surprise. You will also love him as well. I'm sure you already do. Everyone loves this guy. He will be my guest on the 23rd. I will keep it till then. And you guys, I must say thank you so much for always being here on the show. Thanks for all the common faces, Ryan and Ralph and Walid, everybody. And until then, I send you all my greetings, all my love as usual, and salute.